Terms and Conditions. My name's Martha, and this is a show all about the things that underpin society that we don't talk about and don't even really acknowledge. So today we're going to be talking about porn. This is not an episode for the kids. We're going to be talking about sex and pornography and relationships, and lots of, adult themes. So I recommend putting the kids to sleep or sending them off to play in the backyard, whatever. I'm in my H&M Beyonce t-shirt, and let's just get into this. Also, H&M, if you want to sponsor me, you can look forward to more seamless product placement like that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about porn, and my first main point is that porn is one of those things that we have a really intimate and personal relationship within our lives. It's something between us and porn, in the same way that people have a really intimate relationship with things like alcohol or drugs or cigarettes or like fast food and unhealthy food and weight, those kinds of things. So there are people who can, we hear a lot of moral panic about people who are just like glued to their laptop and are constantly engaging with all sorts of deep, dark internet pornography. And, there is a problem with that. But for the most part, there are people who can just consume it a bit and live like really healthy, functioning lives and just sort of get on with their day. So I think it's important that we are able to take a step back and acknowledge our relationship with pornography and our relationship with our own sexuality and that kind of private time that we have, and not let it get in the way of work or relationships or family or friends or that kind of thing. Okay, so let's break this down a bit. Pornography, it's a one-sided relationship between a person and a scene that they're viewing on the computer, or it could be a magazine, but more often than not, it's online video clips these days. It's very intimate. It's in a space that's very private and vulnerable for the individual engaging with it. It's also presumably consensual because what we're viewing is people engaging in sex that they might have been paid to participate in, might have not, but we can assume that it's a consensual act. And it's consistent in that someone usually doesn't like watch porn for the first time when they're young and then suddenly stop watching it. It usually carries on throughout a lifetime, and it ebbs and flows, but it's usually fairly consistent and it's evolving. So there might be times in your life where you want to engage with it more and more frequently. There might be times where you don't really feel the need to, but it's evolving and it's dynamic, and it's and that's partly what makes it really interesting. So the average age of young men who are engaging with porn is 11, and that is problematic because they don't really know what they're looking at. They haven't really necessarily had a sexual relationship with a real person yet, and so porn is really shaping the way that they view reality and the way that they view what a sexual relationship will look like when they're older, and that can be really problematic. It can be really scary and also dangerous for young women, their peers. But I want to avoid making value judgments and condemning things because, kids are curious. Kids have always been curious about sex and sexuality, and suddenly there's this wealth of sexual content that's out there that's just so easily accessible. So it's not their fault that they're finding it and looking at it, whether it's intentional or not. It's we should be really thinking about how we can create structures to protect kids from that and let them access it at a later time when they're potentially more advanced and more able to see it for what it is and not take it as a realistic scenario. And also, especially with pornography as a genre, it's one of its main focuses is making it seem real and realistic and making it seem like, I'm sort of thinking like bad 70s porn, like, I'm just like a housewife and my husband's never here, and, you're here to fix the sink? Like, come on in. I don't have the checkbook. I can't pay you, That's, one of my favorite videos. No, I'm kidding. But it's not real, even though it's portrayed to be real, and that's one of its main draw factors. So when we deal with kids who are starting to watch porn at a young age, we deal with something called porn escalation, where the same clips, the same kind of level of content, if it's just like a man and a woman, or a man and a man and a woman and a woman, engaging in pretty like vanilla, normal, in air quotes, sex. There's nothing really rough about it. It could be sensual. It could be, sexy. It's just kind of pretty. It's hard to define what is standard, but I think you know what I mean. And then that over time, if you continue to engage with that, that's not necessarily going to stimulate you in the same way. So you kind of move towards deeper, darker areas of the porn world, and there's things like rape porn, and facial abuse, which is really horrific, and kind of gang rape, and choking, and like really violent porn that is really dangerous. And even though the actors know ahead of time what's going to happen and what's going to be done to each other, it's acted out in a way that shows that it's spur of the moment, and it's very organic. And when people take that for reality, that can be really dangerous, especially when we're talking about teenagers and young people engaging in their first sexual encounters. They might not necessarily want to do anal sex the first time they engage with a partner. They might not want to be choked. They might not want to be sort of thrown around. So it can be really physically dangerous. So that's a problem. I don't want to make it seem like porn is fine and like everyone should be able to watch porn and like the government shouldn't get involved. But with those kinds of things, we do really need to be protecting our young people who don't have a strong sense of what's realistic and what's allowed in the world and what's considered healthy in sexual conduct. And on from that, young men and young women who are engaged in porn, especially young men, they become desensitized to real life sex, and it's not as stimulating as sex in porn, because their partner isn't wanting to engage in those levels of sexual practice. It could be because there's not as much friction as you would have when you're masturbating. It's for a whole host of reasons, but some young men aren't able to really even engage in real life sex, and that that could be a fine sort of normal choice to make in your life. But at the same time, an intimate sexual relationship is really special, and it's part of the human experience, and I think it would be really sad if people missed out on that because they were so wrapped up in the world. In the same way that it would be sad if someone didn't go outside and just spent their life on social media. You're missing out on a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so I want to talk about the intimate relationship that people have with porn and the role that porn plays in relationships between people. So I was recently asked a question of, is porn cheating? If you're in a monogamous relationship with just two people, if one of the people engages with porn in their private time, is that considered cheating? And I sort of asked the people around me. I asked my mum, I asked a couple of friends, and I was met with a whole host of answers. So I got the answer, no, absolutely not. It's not cheating. That's like, whatever, that's fine. It's not the real thing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I got, of course that's cheating. It's a sexual relationship, and how am I supposed to measure up to a porn star? And, you're not. In the same way that you're not supposed to measure up to, Miranda Kerr in a bikini on Instagram. Like, it's not going to happen. That's a beautiful kind of body, but it's not an average body. But it is beautiful to look at. Yeah, so I think it sort of changes amongst relationships, and it's hard to put out a blanket statement and be like, this is the role that porn plays in your relationship. And so I think it's important that as we discuss with our partner, are we going to see other people? Are we going to have sex with other people? Are we going to, like just figuring out the parameters of your relationship? You should also raise the issue of porn and say, you can watch porn, that's fine. I think that's cool. I'm going to do the same. Or you can do it, I'm not going to, whatever. Or I think this is off limits. And I think, I think that the sexual energy that we put out into the world should just be between us. And that's fine too. Like, I think it just depends on your relationship, and I don't think it's discussed enough. I don't think people talk about it enough when they're DTRing, when they're defining the relationship. And so I would encourage you to talk about it with your partner, even though it's awkward, but it's also awkward to say, like, I don't want you to see other people. I don't want you to hook up with other people. It is awkward to tell someone what you want in an intimate, personal way, but it's important. And if it's about communication and trust and respect. Yeah. So, but I also think it's problematic to say, like, well, men just can't help themselves. Like, men just have to watch porn, and, like, that's fine. I don't like it, but they have to. I think it's okay to expect men to follow your wishes and say, this is what I'm comfortable with. I'd rather that you didn't watch porn, or I think it's dangerous to just assume that men are just, like, wild sexual beings and, like, they can never be tamed by a woman. I think you can say to your partner, your male partner, this is what I'm comfortable with. If you don't want to respect that, like, that's fine. I'm not gonna be with you anymore. And I think it's okay to have expectations of men. And I might even do, like, a whole podcast about locker room talk and Trump's recent comments and that kind of thing. And the fact that it's okay to expect men to be faithful. Like, I think that's a reasonable request. Whatever faithful means to you. Okay. Then I want to talk about regulation. And I think that there are nuances within the porn industry and types of porn where the sort of upper limits of it, the bulk of it that's kind of quite tame, not tame, but it's quite, it might be a little bit risky, but we're not dealing with rape and facial abuse and, the sort of the darker stuff. We're dealing with, like, pretty standard average types of sex that people have. We should probably be talking about having the age of access to be about the age of consent, which is 16 in most places, 18 in others, or 7, I don't know, but 16 is pretty much standard. But I think even just the fact that we're talking about the porn industry being regulated is a result of our shame around sex. And it's not the porn industry's responsibility to regulate itself so that people can't access its content. It's a very profitable industry. It's perfectly legal and regulated and safe for the most part. And especially, companies that are recognized by other major companies like, I don't know, but the fact that it's being called to regulate itself speaks to our shame. It speaks to the social shame that we have around sex. And it hasn't been, it should be regulated in the same way that alcohol and cigarettes are regulated, just an age limit, rather than saying, like, you should have to, I don't know. While there should be regulations around it, it's not the porn industry's responsibility to do that. It's the government's responsibility or the parents' responsibility to put filters on the computers and talk to their kids. We get so much education in school about drugs and alcohol and fast food, and we're taught how to how to deal with those substances, how to not bow into peer pressure, how to, do things in moderation. And I don't think there should be any exception when it comes to sexual content. And we should be taught how to live healthy, functioning lives while still having an active sexual life, whether that be with a partner or with a computer. And porn, not like in a her way, in a Joaquin Phoenix her way, but I think we should be teaching kids that there isn't shame, but we should, but there are also just your own personal parameters about what you should be willing to do and how you should be willing to live your life. I think that's it. I think I'm done. I just want to flag a couple of really good texts that you might want to visit if you're interested in this kind of thing. First of all, there's a great documentary called Hot Girls Wanted on Netflix, which I've probably watched like twice or three times. It's really, really good, and it's about young women in Miami who are teens, like they're 18, but they're referred to as teeny boppers and marketed as teens on porn websites. And it's about their lives and how they get sort of lured into this world of money and sex and drugs and fame, and also the role that social media plays in porn. So all these young porn stars are like, I'm on Vine, like follow me on Vine or follow me on Twitter, and they get all these followers posting behind the scenes photos from like their porn shoots, which I just think is really interesting. There's another film called Don John with Joseph Gordon-Levitt in it, who's such a beautiful man, and it's all about porn reliance and porn addiction and how he can't engage in the same way with real life women as he does with his porn. And there's a real sense of ownership and companionship with his pornography that he engages with, which I think is really fascinating. There's another movie called Lovelace with Amanda Seyfried in it, and she plays Linda Lovelace, who was the first major porn star and was in a film called Deep Throat. And I think it was the first blowjob that was on screen. And there's another movie called Thanks for Sharing, which has like a blockbuster cast, heaps of really cool people in it, and it's all about sex addiction. So less about porn, but more about sex addiction. But porn sort of plays into that. And one of the interesting things I think about porn and sex addiction and their overlap is that sex addicts often deal with their sexual urges by looking at porn, but porn addicts don't necessarily find that sex placates their addiction in the same way. So I think that's pretty fascinating. So I'll write all those titles below if you're interested in checking them out, if there's more content that you want to watch, because this is a really new interesting area, and I'm actually going on a panel on Channel 10 this week. I'm not sure when it's going to be airing, but I'm sure I'll post it on my personal Facebook and the Terms and Conditions Facebook. And I'm going to be talking about sexting and porn and young people, and how in this age of social media and pornography, we can't always see the differences between reality and fiction, and what's staged. And I think it's a really interesting dichotomy. So I'm going to be on Channel 10 in Australia, which is absolutely terrifying, and that's been a major thing this week, which is why this episode's a little bit late. But I hope you enjoyed my discussion of pornography in today's society. If you have any questions, if you have anything that you'd like me to talk about in a future episode, I'd love to hear from you, either via social media or email, martha@thetermsandconditions.net. That's going to be it from me for this week. Next week, we will be talking about girl squads and Taylor Swift, and the power of female friendship, but also the problems of that particular group. So please stay tuned for that. And that's going to be it. Have a lovely weekend, guys, or whenever you're listening to this. And I'll be back next week with more content. Okay, bye.